All right, you're back in the DFSR. It's an NBA podcast. It's Wednesday. It's February 1st. I'm Doug Norrie, owner-operator DFSR.com. If you need some projections for FanDuel and or DraftKings, Yahoo too, take a look at DFSR.com. You get a free 7-day trial to our projection system. There's a reason we're one of the longest running DFS and betting operators in the industry. The projections are great. The service is great. And you're going to get everything that your money pays for here, $29.95 a month. After that, for all sports, you're not going to find a better deal than that. Go to DFSR.com, grab that free trial, jump into the members only chat. You will just, all you have to say is, you're happy to be a member here. Chatters will chat you up and say, for sure. And that's the best sales pitch we can get. DFSR.com to get you started. 9 games in the NBA today. Full slate coming off an interesting little Tuesday that saw things kind of play out the way we said on the podcast yesterday. Not going to relitigate all that stuff, but do have an interesting one, a set of games that's going here on Wednesday. The real story here is we have a big slate. We have a lot of bad defenses. So in DFS and betting to some degree, where your focus is different as a fan of DFS than it is maybe as regular basketball. While sometimes the brand of basketball that is the best to watch on a given night, which is like when really good teams face each other, and those good teams usually are good on both ends of the ball, both offense and defense. From a DFS standpoint, that's not the case. We actually like it better to some degree when the bad teams play. One, we can focus on just playing team guys against those teams. And also those teams sometimes tend to play a little bit faster and looser than other squads. And we have a setup here on Wednesday where we have 8 of the top 10 teams in terms of pace going. That's Golden State, Memphis, OKC, Minnesota, San Antonio, Sacramento, Atlanta, Detroit. That's 8 of the top 10 in pace. So you're already getting a volume up just scenario with each of those teams, whoever they're playing against, because the totals are going to be higher. The teams run fast. It's going to be a little bit more up and down the court. They want to get out in transition. And that's great for teams going the other way, just because it increases the volume, the shots, the possessions, and really everything else across the board. And then on the other side, you get the defensive efficiency. You get 5 of the worst 10 teams also going. Now, some of these you're going to hear some overlap. San Antonio, this is in order of worst to better defenses. San Antonio, Detroit, Houston, Portland, and Sacramento. So 3 of those teams, San Antonio, Detroit, and Sacramento, are on both lists. Bad defenses and really, really fast pace. That's one of the reasons you're going to see some higher totals on this slate. A couple of those teams, Sacramento and San Antonio, play each other. There's no wonder that is a 244.5 total. Absolutely massive number. That is just basically the recognition that there will be almost no defense at all played in that game. 244.5 is just a crazy number. It's like 6 points higher than I think the next closest on the slate, something like that, which is, I mean, for a 9-game slate to have numbers this big is crazy. And again, it's admitting that these two teams are not that interested. Yeah, it's 6 points higher than Memphis and Portland, which is 239, and then Golden State and Minnesota is 238.5. So to sit 6-7 points higher than those other really, really high totals is hilarious. The Sacramento has 125.75 implied total. I mean, these are like all-star game, not quite, but all-star game adjacent numbers, it would seem, from the teams that are playing. And it makes for an interesting just DFS situation, because you look at this and really betting too, because I mean, even thinking about betting the overs in some of these games and I know betting overs is way, way more fun. Just because it's tough it's tough. It's not fun. You're sitting there rooting for guys to not score. Unders are just not that great. But even these numbers will push the bounds of any reasonable thinking around just the sport as a whole. Just betting, there's a team's going to get out there. Their median outcome is 125.75 points, 126 points. Like, holy mackerel. There's so many things that, even in good situations, that need to go right for that number to hit. We have our system as a slight under on that. But when you have this game, when you have totals like this, 244, 231, 238, 238.5, 237, right? These are the 239. These are the totals in this game. One, it almost for sure means that on the the scores are going to be pretty high from a DFS standpoint because there's just too many opportunities for too many good players. Two, you're probably going to be in a situation because of lineup constraints around just having to fade a few of these games, like just having to probably sit back and watch and, or scoreboard watch, or, just kind of, stare at your phone and as plays go in, depending on, I know people watch, quote unquote, watch basketball in all different ways. A lot of you are probably out there are just, phone sweaters where you're just, sneaking a look at the phone. Something else is going on with someone else in the room and you're kind of watching scores go by, watching things kind of tick up or tick down. Following these games on a nightly basis from a watching standpoint is really tough, but you're going to have to be in a situation where you're going to have to just fade some of these games. And that's a really, really tough proposition just because, a few of these are going to go absolutely off. And I'm not even mentioning the games that are just the regular ones, like Boston, the Nets and the Celtics, right? Like that game has kind of a low total at 226. And there's a lot to probably like on it. A smaller slate, you'd be talking yourself into it. Like Toronto and Utah, 228.5 total. I could talk myself into some plays in this, but it still doesn't even hold a candle to some of these other games with those teams that have like matched up bad defenses and fast pace. So we're in an interesting spot. You are going to be in a situation with a game total that's really high that you probably don't have exposure to from a DFS standpoint. This is why betting can kind of work its way into, having or definitely having a hybrid approach to these slates to say, okay, here's the best value for DFS. Here's the best value when it comes to betting. Like there's multiple ways to tackle this now that we just didn't necessarily have before. And that is a good spot. And it means you're sort of, especially if you're looking at this from an entertainment standpoint, you can have sweat exposure or, entertainment exposure to many different scenarios that just aren't relying on salary constraints. And we'll go over a few of the over-unders that I like from a player prop standpoint and from a game standpoint on this one. But just on a high level, these slates are fun, but sometimes it can be rough to look at some of the scenarios that are setting up and say, well, I don't have any Washington, Detroit, let's say. That game has a really high total. That there's almost definitely going to be a lot of scoring in that game. And I'm just going to have to sit and watch it go by without maybe having any at least DFS money on the line. Okay. Another kind of theme of this slate, and actually was really what's becoming a theme in just DFS and betting in general for the NBA, is just the amount of great point guards there are. And this one, to sort of go along with what I was just talking about with having to fade some really good players in some really good situations, this is definitely happening at the point guard position here on Wednesday. There are, I would say, 6 and maybe 7 point guards in really nice spots who you just can't play them all, right? Like you just can't. You can make a case for all of them on a shorter slate. We'd be definitely rostering one of these guys. You just can't play all these guys. It's going to mean having to fade a really good point guard or 3 point guards and then having to play just maybe garbagey small forward kind of guys and then decide what you're going to do at power forward and center. But let me just go through what you're looking at in terms of options. Don't have time to break down the statistics on all these guys, but the names are not going to be new to you at all. First, we have SGA going against Houston. Houston, obviously, one of the worst defenses in the league. SGA, a total superstar, is front runner for player of the year or most improved player, probably going to win. Houston, one of the worst defensive efficiency teams. I left them off of that initial group only because their pace wasn't quite as fast, like they're 13th, but they really bump up into one of the best DFS matchups you can have. And I'm going to talk about Houston here at length a little bit more in the podcast in a little bit. So you have SGA against him or against Houston. Among the OKC guys, he's really one of the only ones that you can rely on for minutes. They're trying to get him an all NBA slot. Like they can't really make a case to totally tank because they're sort of decent. So you are getting a really high floor on SGA. Great. Then you have Ja going against Portland. Here's another situation, especially if they don't have Desmond Bain. Usage is going to be high. The minutes have really been high for him. Portland does not play one of the faster paces, but they are one of the worst defensive teams. So like I said before, they're on that list of really good matchups. This game has a really high total. Ja would be in a really incredibly difficult fade. You get Steph against Minnesota. Minnesota, really fast pace. Not very good on defense. Even better with Gobert around, but still not very good. Maybe you talk yourself out of Curry because Poole in the starting lineup, they're getting Wiggins back. The shot distribution gets, sectioned off a little bit more. So maybe you feel like you leave him out. Then you get the Dame. The Blazers have been running him a million minutes. He's played 38, 36, 39, 30, and 39 in the last 5 games. Memphis, good defense, but play very fast. Like, this is going to be a pace up game for Lillard. Gets in a slightly better situation, probably if Bane is out of the lineup, just from a defensive standpoint. They are still without Steven Adams. So I would not want to get to this late game. Not like the timing matters really, but get to this game a little bit later. That's a 7:00 game. Sorry, thinking West Coast with the Blazers. Anyway, 7:00, that game tips off, and you're thinking, well, I got to go watch Dame in this one, and maybe not have an exposure to him. Now you get to Darren Fox at going against San Antonio. Now, he is interesting from a FanDuel perspective because he's so much cheaper than those other guys. So all those other guys that I just mentioned, they're all in the 10K range. Fox is at 8,600. This, when we're starting to just try to figure out where to go with this situation, Fox at 8,600, it makes the decision a little bit easier because you get a $1,400 savings. He's not as good as those guys I just mentioned, but the matchup is almost the nuts. San Antonio is like one of the worst defenses, if not the worst defense in the whole. Yeah, they're the worst defense by far in the whole league, and they play one of the fastest paces in the league. Number 6 overall pace. This is the exact spot we want to have. I mentioned some of these totals before. Sacramento has that huge, massive total. I think Fox, if you're trying to pick out the point guards you want to go with, Fox makes the most sense because you get the savings and you get the best matchup. So I think you probably end up defaulting to that situation. And then you get Chris Paul. He faces off against Atlanta. They are still without Devin Booker. Atlanta plays a pretty fast pace. The whole theme of this podcast and YouTube today is fast pace, bad defense. Their bottom third defense, top 10 pace. Chris Paul, they've had the reins off of him when it comes to the minutes lately. He's played 34, 39, 38, 38. And then he threw a 27-minute game in there with the blowout. They're not worried about saving him, really. No Booker. Usage is up. And I think that's another one where if you just take the savings on FanDuel, 8,600, 8,300 for Fox and Paul, this is where you can probably start feeling better about fading some of those really, really good point guards because the price just ends up dictating where you can go. So I think that when I'm looking at all these point guards, I left Kyrie off the list because he faces Boston. I think that he's been amazing. It's the statistical case for Kyrie in a vacuum is definitely there. He just happens to run into a really good defensive Boston team. So I think you can just end up leaving him off that list. I still find Harden against Orlando, kind of like the spot he's in. Fred VanVleet's been playing a million minutes. There is D'Angelo Russell too to talk about, but in general, we're in a point guard league right now. These guys are awesome. Some of these dudes play massive minutes. Some have really, really nice matchups, and it's going to be tough to watch them tonight, knowing that you probably don't have exposure to all of them. Did want to mention a bet here that I think you can get in. I already have this one in right now on some places. It's probably going to creep up, but Chris Paul at over 17.5 points looks really pretty nice here. Going against Atlanta. The game's got a good total. Now Atlanta, is not, the Suns are slim favorites here at -1.5. So the thin spread. Paul has the minutes, like I said, for him before, have completely been there of late. So I don't think you're going to get buzzed off on that. He's running like 35 in regulation. He has 19, 31. That was an overtime game. 22, 14 blowout, got buzzed off minutes, and 22 in his last 5. He's getting up double-digit shots. Sometimes he's gotten into the 16, 18, 20 range in terms of shots. Not worry about the perimeter defense from Atlanta here with DeJounte Murray and Trae Young. Love the 17.5 over for Chris Paul here. I think this one, am I the kind of guy that says like lock? No, but let's just call this one kind of a lock. 17.5. The game sets up perfectly for him. This is a situation that I definitely want to have the over. The Rockets are still going to be without Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr. This is interesting because a couple things. So the drop off in talent for them after these guys are out of the lineup is pretty stark. They're starting Deshaun Nix at point guard. Eric Gordon's getting a lot of minutes. From a overall team perspective, this team with these two guys off the court has an offensive rating of just 106.29. When they're on the court, it's near almost 111. They take a massive dip without these dudes on the court, and this is like over 500, about 550 minutes. So I'd call the sample size and just the eye test completely there. It's interesting to think about this and where you think about how you attack the rest of the guys, because while I like Sengun from a DFS standpoint, it's worth it to note that like his numbers have been not as amazing with these guys out of the lineup. The minutes have been there, but he's taken a hit overall in terms of fantasy just because the team is much worse. I still think Sengun is a good play. I do want to say, don't sleep on the fact that this team is just not nearly as good. They're not a good team in general, but they're bad offensively without Jalen Green or Kevin Porter Jr. They have very few guys in the way of shot creation. A bet that I've already put in here is a bet on the under on the 113.5 total for the Houston Rockets, just in a team total, not the game total, just a team total against the Thunder. I do not like them hitting this. It's been a struggle for them to score without those other guys. 95 points last game against Cleveland, 103 against Washington the game before that, like 104 3 games ago against Minnesota. That's without their guards. It's a struggle for them to score. Think about getting in the under on 113.5 for the Rockets. If you can find it, that is something that I feel really, really good about based on how the situation is breaking out for those guys. Still think some of these guys are good DFS value, but I'm worried that it's just really a total slog without without those guys in the lineup. A couple other news and notes just to kind of close this thing off for a big Wednesday slate. Obviously, you head over to DFSR.com. We got you covered with all this. We're trying to recap sort of high level thoughts, some bets, some DFS plays each day going into this to just kind of get you started, just kind of prime that pump on what the NBA's action is. Like I said before, there's all these point guards. Some of these other positions can get really rough. Small forward specifically continues to be sort of a problem. Our system's liking guys like Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson still. It just wants to find as much value. Kenrich Williams is still starting and should still start for OKC. I do not trust OKC as far as I can throw them. And as they say, with my bad back, I shouldn't be throwing anybody. But Williams did play 33 minutes last game, got 7 points, 8 rebounds. It's like 3 steals. It's like just enough to kind of squint and see it with him. So something to consider. And OKC has been fine just switching around their starting lineup at times, because Shai gets to play his minutes, Giddey gets to play his minutes, Jalen Williams with the E gets to play his minutes, and then everything else can kind of just end up switching around. But keep an eye on if he's going to be in the starting lineup. We're keeping an eye on the Desmond Bane situation. That does affect sort of the overall expectations around some of the other Memphis guys. Rudy Gobert is questionable every single game. He plays every single game, so I'm not too worried about that. And Trae Young should be back here for the Hawks after sitting out last game. All right, we're going to get out of here. DFSR.com. Go head over there, hang out in the chat, ask some questions, check out the projections. There's a reason we're one of the longest ones in the business to do this. It's because we take pride in what we do, and we think we do it better than anybody. DFSR.com will get you started with a free 7-day trial. Go check that out. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more hoops.